I just have a short introduction to greet Ármann here. So thanks to everybody for coming. Most of you are in Zoom. I've got a pair here joining me live, but most have decided to go with Zoom. We might get some stragglers in yet, but today we have Ármann Jakobsson with us live from Iceland over Zoom. He's here to give us a guest lecture to my Icelandic sagas and translation class. This week and last week we had classes. We journeyed through the 1866 translation of Gisli Saga Súrssonar by George Webb Dasent. The class has a focus on using open source, open access materials for the course, but it was a bit remiss of me to not remember that Gisli Saga was one of the outlaw sagas that they did in the Viking Society web publications translations. So they are available open access. It's included in the edition titled 3 Icelandic Outlaw Sagas. However, it has been beneficial to see through this the evolving corpus of English translations available of medieval Icelandic literature. Dasent's translations of names is at times very interesting to note. The Súrssons are the Soursops, and Þorgrímur the Witch, who we know by this moniker based on Ármann's own work, his article that I've referred to in the advertisement for today. The original is Thorgrímur Nev, but he's given the name by Dasent of Thorgrim Bottlenose. So I'm not terribly unhappy that this one slipped by me in preparation for the course. Mr. Bottlenose will be a part of Ármann's discussion today, and more importantly in relation to the view of the troll from a medieval Icelandic perspective. Ármann is a scholar and prolific author of many monographs and articles, as we know. He specializes in medieval literature, cultural studies, and folklore in the Faculty of Icelandic and Comparative Cultural Studies at the University of Iceland. In addition to his scholarly works, he is an author of fiction, most notably crime fiction in recent years. Have any of those been translated yet, Ármann? Your crime novels?
Not yet.
We got to work on that. Ármann is no stranger to the University of Manitoba or the Icelandic community here. He's spoken at events in the past. Another over Zoom, and another I can recollect in conjunction with the symposium we were holding for a few years called Medieval and Modern, which I'd like to plug, resulted in a publication called Cultural Legacies of Old Norse Literature, New Perspectives, edited by Dustin Gerhardt and Christopher Crocker. Thanks for joining us, Ármann. Yeah.
Sorry.
But without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ármann to our afternoon discussion on Gisli Saga. Please take it away, Ármann. I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. So it's evening in Iceland, so I'll try to be a bit informal. And I will be speaking about Gisli Saga a bit, but also about sagas in general. The Gisli Saga is a very useful example about what I'm going to talk about today. So many of the Icelandic saga narratives concern in some way the Christianization of Iceland, clearly seen as a very pivotal event. And Gisli Saga is, in fact, one of the few sagas that doesn't really describe the Christianization, doesn't really feature in the saga. That doesn't mean that the opposition between Christianity and paganism isn't important in the saga. So this is clearly regarded as a pivotal event in the history of Iceland in the 13th century. And this period kind of attracted all the attention of the historians of the late medieval age, the 13th, 14th, and 15th century, when the sagas are composed. And another thing that is important to keep in mind is that the sagas are now increasingly used as sources for mentality, ideology, various social features, but they are essentially narratives, so they're always limited a bit by that, even though a lot of interesting concept appear in the sagas. They are really defined, and they may not even be what we would call a concept today, but just words that are possibly used less scientifically than we would like. So almost all of medieval Icelandic writing, and there's a lot of it, is history. A large majority concerns the distant past, and what is most attractive to historians are the 10th and 11th century that border the Christianization of Iceland that was meant to have happened in 1000. But of course, it was not really an event that took place in 1 year, even though it's described like that in Ari's Icelandic book. But gradually, the authors began to acknowledge that the Christianization actually started much sooner, and that it wasn't over when it was over. And this is noted in several of the sagas, where in Grettis Saga, for example, it's even said that some of the embers of paganism survived. Another thing I would like to draw your attention to is the idea that Snorri Sturluson is a very good representative for what paganism was like. And this may be a mistaken idea. Snorri is the version of paganism that Snorri presents us with. It might be more useful to look at it as a slice of paganism and not paganism itself. And you can see that when you compare these sagas, such as the sagas of the Icelanders with Snorri Sturluson, they do not have the same version of paganism. Some of the gods that Snorri mentions in Snorri don't really appear in many other sources, and there are other gods like Þorgerðr Hörgabrúður that appear in several sources but are not mentioned in Snorri's Edda. And I think the most useful way to look at that is that Snorri, of course, he's partly incorrect, as all scholars are, but mostly he is just not giving us the entirety of paganism. He's only presenting us with a slice of it, because paganism was a complicated, complicated religions that lasted for centuries in Scandinavia, in a wide geographical area. And paganism is one of the things that the sagas are particularly interested in. And you can see it in Gisla Saga, for example. Gisla Saga can be read as a realistic saga about brothers who come into conflict and their wives and divisions within the family. But there are also a lot of paranormal figures, including the dream women that Gisli follow Gisli around in his dreams. And without those dream women, the saga would be completely different. If we didn't have those narratives, the character of Gisli would be a completely different character. And one of the interesting characters is Thorgrim Bottlenose. I'm not sure about Bottlenose. I'm not even sure 10th century Icelanders had bottles. He is in the saga as a professional witch. I decided back in 2008 and call him a witch, even though he is a male. And the editor of the journal suggested warlock, but I don't like that word. And in witchcraft, the gender boundaries are partly erased. And one of the examples of that are precisely the pagan ritual that Þorgrímur performs. And it is said that he did it with all Ergi and skelmiskap. So these are he's said to do it fjölkingilega with Ergi and skelmiskapur. And these words you can open a dictionary and read a suggestion of what they means, but we don't necessarily know what they mean. And I think many dictionaries will have mistakes when it comes to very old words, because we have very few attestations of them, and the fewer attestations, the more their interpretation lies on one particular narrative and one particular understanding of that narrative. But it is said that Þorgrímur uses something called Ergi in his magic, and this is also mentioned in Heimskringla with Odin. And people have regarded this increasingly as some kind of gender bending. I have suggested that it may also be other things that are being bent than gender, but this is something that he does to perform the magic. And in Heimskringla it is said that the magic that Odin knew was so full of Ergi that men could not do it without being shamed. It is noteworthy, though, that Odin still does it. So Odin breaks the rules that other men have to follow. And another word used about Þorgrímur and his magic ritual is tröllskapur. And this is, I guess, this is the beginning of my troll studies. The article I wrote about Þorgrímur and his tröllskapur, and I have this book here. I think you can see it now if I hold it right in front of me.
Yeah, it has to be like centered on your body.
Yes. And this is a book I published back in, when was it, 2017? And is about, the subtitle is Paranormal Activity in the Medieval North. But it all began with the word troll that I was researching and discovered that the 19th century meaning of the word are not the same as the medieval meaning. So you think today that you know what a troll is, and there are even books published in Iceland with trolls that are sold to tourists. You know, if you buy things that are sold to tourists, you do so at your own risk. That includes the troll books. More alarmingly, the trolls have become cutified in the last few decades. So they are now harmless, slightly ugly mountain dwellers. In the most of the 19th century and early 20th century, they were extremely dangerous and magical mountain dwellers. But they were, in that period, what you'd call a race or a species or a category. They were a particular kind of paranormal other. And when I was looking at the medieval Icelandic examples, I realized that in medieval Iceland, a troll is not a particular category, but it is used for various types of paranormal otherness. And in fact, mountain dwellers are not the main type. The main types are witches, like Þorgrímur, and ghosts. And so a witch is a troll and a ghost is a troll. And I would say these are the two most prominent types, but trolls are also used for various other kinds of things, and often things that cannot be safely identified. There are figures in the Fornaldarsögu that are called well urinators, people who go around and urinate in wells, obvious health hazard. And of course, this means that these are very antisocial creatures, and they're referred to as trolls. But we don't know what kind of trolls they are. Are they human? Are they bestial? Or what are they? But when I was looking at the relationship between the ghost and the witch, I came up against the fact that is also mentioned in the laws, that there is a kind of relationship, metonymic relationship perhaps between the two, because many of the ghosts are awakenings, and there is somebody who has awakened them, and that somebody must be a witch. So the troll, the witch, and the thing that they raise from the dead, the ghost, are both trolls. And this is what I call the Frankenstein example, because in the 20th century, the scientist who took an undead and brought him to life was called Frankenstein, but the monster was also called Frankenstein. Not originally, but eventually. And this is actually the same kind of semantic shift you can see with the trolls, that the things that they do, the people who do the magic are trolls. The things that emerge by the magic are also trolls. And most of the examples of the word, I was just counting examples at the time, are very much in the human world. There is a witch that just lives at a farm next door, and then there are the zombies from the graveyard that the witch is trying to awaken. And not all ghosts, of course, in medieval Iceland are awakenings. Some of them are just began to walk of their own accord, and mostly because they were evil people who had refused to stay dead. So when, of course, I was examining this, I came up against a 19th century scholarly study, and that is something I also address in the book. A lot of the book is about scholarship, because we can't really talk about the sources without addressing previous scholarship, because we are really influenced, we are guided by that same scholarship. So people, even though they pretend to be thinking matters anew, they are often stuck in a kind of vehicle set in motion by 19th century scholarship that had very different premises from those we hold. And in folklore is mostly created as a scholarly topic, is mostly created in the early 19th century, and it is heavily influenced by the natural sciences. And that is something I find most interesting, that the 18th century natural sciences impacted 19th century folklore. And one of the ways it was impacted by the natural sciences is its strong emphasis on categorization. So to be a scholar is to categorize, just like biologists categorized animals, and they did those with a particular system invented by Carl Linné from Uppsala, and this is a system that's still used today. And the folklorists followed a similar method of categorizing, and they were usually making books at this stage. They were collecting folk tales, and they had to organize their material, and they categorized it according to what kind of paranormal being appears in the material. So in the 19th century Icelandic folk tales, we have something called troll tales, ghost tales, and witch tales. And this gives us the erroneous impression that these are three very distinct categories, which they are in the 19th century, but not in medieval Iceland. So a troll is a witch, a ghost, and also what the 19th century people called a troll. So this is something I have been trying to rebel against in my studies, trying to look at the words anew finding out how they're really used. And another thing that, of course, intrigued me, and this is something that when you think about folklore and the scientific method you come up against, is that the difference between animals categorized by natural scientists and paranormal beings categorized by folklorists is that the animals actually exist, but the paranormal beings are things that human beings see. So this is not quite the same. So folklorists tended to categorize paranormal beings as if they actually existed. Even none of them believed that they actually existed. They were extremely learned scientific men, but they still treated them as essentially animals. And this is something I'm trying not to do. And one of the ways you can try not to do this is when you have a paranormal encounter, that you try not to focus on the paranormal being that is being seen, but the person who sees the paranormal being. So in my book, the people who see the paranormal beings are the protagonists of the story. I'm not saying that it all happens in their head. Maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. And in a way, I think that paranormal beings are it's easier to argue that they exist if we regard them as something seen by actual living people, because at least they exist in the head of these people. So this is something I've been trying to do in my studies, looking at the audience, the people who meet paranormal others, and not at the paranormal beings. And I have a chapter in my book, early in the book, called Cave. And this is a very small narrative about a man called Þorgrímur, who lives in the West Fjords of Iceland. Like Gisli Saga, this is an unusual story, not because it takes place entirely in the pagan period, but because it takes place entirely in the Christian period. But it is a really simple narrative about two men who are trying to go to church in the middle of winter in Iceland. And of course, we have really bad weather in Iceland, often in the middle of winter. And they get lost and seek shelter and find a cave. So the cave is a shelter from the weather, but the cave is also a dangerous place. They don't really want to go too deep into it, and Þorgrímur puts the sign of the cross near the entrance of the cave, because he knows something might be in the cave. And with him is his servant, and they both hear something, speaking of us, and they see not the creature, but they see its eyes, its glowing eyes, and the eyes are huge, indicating that this is a huge, monstrous being. And nothing really happens to the man in the cave, but only one of them can remember the lines of poetry spoken by the cave dweller, and that is Þorgrímur, and he survives. The servant forgets all the lines and he dies immediately after. Of course, no causal relationship is given between the servant's inability to remember his lines. You can use that maybe, Ryan, in class. Like, if you don't remember your facts, you may die. This is a very good narrative for teachers to use. But servant dies, and that means that the story somehow, in a very non-obvious way, concerns death. It's about life and death. They are in a life and death situation, and they emerge from this cave without ever knowing what was in the cave. And this is so often how the paranormal works in Icelandic narrative. We have a troll in the Sturlung narrative, which is a contemporary narrative. So this is a narrative written about something that happened recently, not about the ancient past. And there, a group of people traveling in the mountains, they see a troll. And you could ask, what kind of troll is that? But the truth is, the text never tells you. Like a modern reader would assume the kind of troll that's in the folk tales, or if they're very young, they might think about the cutified trolls that are meant for tourists. But there's no explanation of what the troll is. So you might think, because it happens in the mountains, that this was kind of a mountain dweller, or it could be a ghost, or a witch, or a person who urinates in wells, or whatever. A troll can mean whatever. When they just say they saw a troll, you don't really understand what kind of being they saw. And I use this narrative a lot because it's so essential for our understanding of medieval literature. We think we understand, but there are so many words that are just never explained, and it's impossible to know what it is that they saw. And that is also not the main point of the story. The main point of the story is that when they saw the troll, they were startled, and later they all die. So the troll is another harbinger of death. So the story is not really about the troll, it's about the people who see a troll on the heath, and then they, this means possibly, maybe it's a coincidence, but possibly it means that they will be dead soon. So a lot of my book concerns word usage and words about magic, for example. There are several words used about magic, and they have a very different connotation. Some of them seem to refer to noise, other refer to the age of witchcraft, and there are several types of words that seem to go into all direction. So how am I for time? Yes, I wanted to say something about what kind of, I began with categorization, I began with the words, but then when I was working on the troll, I came up against sociology. And I can tell you a little anecdote, which I sometimes tell, because a good friend of mine is a professor of sociology at the University of Iceland, and he has read many of my earlier texts that concern things like young people, children, and old people, class distinction, etc. And he said, yeah, I noticed you've been straying into the paranormal, but I found your sociological work much more interesting. And I said, there's nothing more sociological than the paranormal. And perhaps I convinced him to read the book. But it is true, the paranormal is all about sociology. And Thorgrímur knows is actually a good example. He is some kind of farmer, but he is not distinguished in any way. He is, in fact, a kind of hired hand that can be bought to perform magic, and we have several of those in the sagas. And they are often people from abroad who have no genealogy, and they are late immigrants into Iceland. They come late, and all the good parts have been settled, and they get something else, and they become professional magicians. There's a whole family of such witches. In Laxdala Saga, they come from the Hebrides, if I remember it correctly. And the Hebrides is precisely the sort of place these witches might come from. They are like latecomers, they are foreigners. They don't really have any background that is of note. We also have people in the sagas that practice witchcraft, but it is never mentioned that they practice witchcraft, and they're never referred to as trolls or sorcerers or anything like that. And a good example is the whole family of the rmann in Egil's Saga. Egil Skallagrímsson, his father Skallagrímur, his father Kveldúlfur. They are all shapeshifters who seem to be able to do various kinds of magic, but this is never used, this is never mentioned about them. Like, even though it's related that they do magic, they're never referred to as magicians, because these are very rich, high-born people who arrived early in Iceland. Skallagrímur had a huge settlement in Iceland. He was one of the richest people in Iceland, and so was Egil. And a rich person like Egil is not a witch. And the same goes for Njáll in Njál's Saga. He is also not a witch. He is has prophetic gifts, but they're never referred to as witchcraft. And it's never said that he performs magic of any kind, but he sometimes walks out muttering to himself, which could be some kind of ritual. Unlike Njáll is not quite as rich as the Skallagrímur family. So he is actually, I think, in the saga accused of witchcraft, but not openly. The fact that he has no beard is used as an indication of Ergi. And as you may recall from the beginning of my talk, Ergi is something that witches do. And it's some kind of gender-bending activity. So the people who are constantly mentioning that Njáll has no beard, they're actually saying he is a witch. He is this guy who you all regard so highly, who knows the laws, who is a very respected magnate. He is really a witch. And one of the biggest slurs in the saga is that his sons are actually beardless too, but that he has put dung in their faces to make the beards. So their beards are not proper beards, they're made by dung. They're called dung beardlings. And this is because Njáll actually uses dung in agriculture. So he's a very, he is an innovator, but this is used against him. So they say, aha, he is a witch, and the beards of his sons are made by excrement. And this is something that is not, excrement is never regarded as particularly nice, but in the Middle Ages, it's very much associated with the devil, with the infernal, and there are countless stories where this association is highlighted. So they are saying that Njáll and his sons are essentially demons. And this is a very sociological, Njál's Saga is a very sociological story. It's all about reputation, bad-mouthing people, about masculinity. That's a huge theme in the saga, how masculinity is constantly used to belittle all the males, like people are constantly questioning everyone's masculinity, which is unusual in the sagas. So this is a highly social saga, but it also has this witchcraft theme, and so there is a class distinction between witches and magnates. There are also other factors at play. One thing I think I would like to mention at the end, we need to have some time for discussion, don't we? But one thing.
You're doing well. You have lots of time.
Okay, that's good. But one thing that's noteworthy, and you see this both in Snorra-Edda and in the sagas, is this paternal relationship between the pagan and the Christian. So this is a huge conundrum that the historians in Iceland were in the 13th and 14th century and the 15th. Like, they, of course, respected their ancestors, and these ancestors they constantly wrote about are alive in the 10th century, but they are also pagans. So an ancestor may be noble because he's your ancestor, but he's also pagan, and that means demonic in some way. And they write about this a lot. There are narratives where most of the pagan heroes are shown to be in hell. And it's noteworthy that Snorri Sturluson uses this in his Snorra-Edda, and by establishing a relationship between the giants and the gods. So many of the gods are descended from giants, and that's kind of similar to what you see in Greek mythology. So the enemy of the gods is kind of their ancestor, and this is the strange enemy status that the ancestors of late medieval historians were in. So they had to constantly wrestle with this fact that their beloved ancestors were also pagan, and they did wrestle with it. They could have avoided the history of the pagan period, but instead they were constantly drawn to it. So I think this is about it for now. I really want to hear something from your students.
Yeah, that would be great. There's a lot to unpack there, but one of the main things that I was thinking about was tröllskapur and the well pissers in relation to, you know, the online troll of modernity.
Yes.
And I know we've discussed this before, but do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, it's curiously apt that, like, trolling on the internet is originally a concept from fishing, like trolling. You're tracking somebody, but then the figure of the troll emerges, and in some strange way, it's very much like the medieval idea of the troll, because the modern troll is very often unseen. It's someone on the internet that you don't know who it is, and their intentions are unclear, but they're definitely hostile. This is something more or less ubiquitous with trolls in the Middle Ages, that they are hostile. They are not, like, people don't use the word troll about themselves or their friends in a nice way. They are seen as hostile beings, essentially. So this is, in a way, a curiously fitting that the internet troll should be.
Yes.
And also,
I was sort of thinking that, you know, maybe we do know what they meant by troll in sort of an inherent sense that we don't always really sort of.
I think we have definitely stumbled on it in the meaning of the internet troll. Like, the internet troll is very much like the medieval idea of a troll. So this is something that is, you know, strangely apt.
Yes, quite strange. Another thing that I was thinking about was the fact that you had the theme of gender boundary crossing.
Yeah.
I don't remember you saying anything. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed something. Saying something about the troll being a gender boundary breaker. Is that? Do you find that?
Well, the troll is often so vague that we can't even know what gender it is. But of course, the one of the main types of trolls is the witch, and they are definitely gender. They definitely cross gender boundaries. But
I was wondering.
as in
Sorry.
the case of Egil and his family, Odin does it too, and that's all right. He can do it. Other people cannot do it. He can do it.
Other people are shamed for it.
Yeah, but not Odin. Odin is allowed to be both genders, essentially.
So what I was thinking when I was asking if there's a gender crossing is, are females called trolls as well?
Yes, often in a derogatory sense. Like if somebody wants to marry a paranormal woman, they are referred to as troll. And one of the people who actually use that word is Hallbjörn the half troll, who sees no irony in it, that he himself is called the half troll, but he chastises his son's chosen mate and calls her a troll. But very often you just don't know what the trolls are. Like in Saga, Hallgerður Langbrók says, the trolls take your friends. But we don't know what trolls. But I think we should not forget the demons. I haven't mentioned the demons because we are talking about the family sagas mostly, but in the king sagas, the word troll is used, meaning demon. Like it's not a witch, or it's clear that it means more or less the same as demon. And there is this narrative in Ola Saga Tryggvasonar about courtiers of the king listening to trolls, and these trolls are the same type of creature that is often called demon. So, and this is of course like Icelandic medieval literature is so strangely Christian and pagan at the same time. Like the Christianity is the hegemonic religion, and everything is defined through it, but it's filled with pagan remnants that somehow have just been allowed to exist in this new religion. And this is like true of Christianity elsewhere. Like no belief system is completely ubiquitous. There will always be things from other belief systems existing within it. And this is something you can see very much with several pagan things. And this is actually mentioned in some of the sagas. It says, you know, many people stopped being Christian after Christianization, but not everyone. So I was going to say pagan. Did I say that?
You said Christian.
Yeah, I meant people stopped being pagan, but some people did not.
Yeah.
And that's the witches. Like being a witch is essentially non-Christian, because the witches are like,
sorry, go ahead.
they are strong competitors of the saints. Like the saints perform miracles, the witches do their demonic things. Sometimes there's a result that seems similar. Like how are people to know? So they're a competing force.
I feel like they're trying to reconcile their pagan past, and I definitely see what you mean with the witches being sort of cast as this other. Um, but what I'm wondering is, I think of Ergi Saga specifically with Thorgrim comes to my mind quite often. Some of the times when you're talking about these things, and she was a devout Christian.
Yes.
But she is sort of a trollish woman.
Yeah, and she has things in her possession that are clearly not entirely Christian.
That's true too. Yeah, it's hard to understand where her boundaries are located, and I feel like that's Saga literature as a whole too. We can't figure out where one boundary ends or begins.
This is one reason why I mentioned the Moomin trolls in my book, because this love-hate relationship is very much echoed in one of the Moomin troll books, where the Moomin troll lets his ancestor out of the cupboard, and his ancestor is extremely weird and unintelligible. He's impossible to understand, but the Moomin troll still feels a close affinity to him, like the kinship is real, and his relationship with this weird, savage, ancient creature is still kind of loving. So that's a nice narrative from the 20th century that kind of does the same thing as the medieval authors are trying to do sometimes.
I feel like we're still doing it, that we're still trying to reconcile our pagan past with our society today.
I think there's often a campaign against the past. You know, people really dislike the past. They're trying to past, and they say things like old-fashioned and old, and you know, the past is like evil in its very nature, and still we like the past in spite of that.
Yeah, in spite of that, we have nostalgia, I guess.
Do you in English also say it's 2024? Like, people do that a lot in Iceland. They say, but we say it's 2024 now. You know, everything is supposed to be fixed.
I say that kind of thing. Yes.
So there's a strange religion of modernity, like 2024. Everything is supposed to be perfect. In the past, of course, things were not good, and everyone accepts that. So this is what I'd call a present religion.
Yeah, that's an interesting sort of look at it.
Yeah, these issues that I'm talking about do not just concern medieval Iceland. No. They are very general issues. And this is why I often bring in other cultures as well.
Well, the comparative approach definitely has its place for sure. I would like to open it up a bit, see if anybody else would like to talk or ask you a question. We do have several people in the Zoom, and my students Carla and Jason are available here.
Yes.
Any thoughts from the gallery? Any burning questions you have for Ármann? Any comments about what we were talking about?
I promised an hour because it's after 9 in Iceland.
Yeah, so, and yeah, we're coming up on 9:30.
Yeah. But now you hear me.
So we've got about 10 minutes with you.
Yeah.
Left. Oh, okay. Oh, so Katrin has something to tell us.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, thank you. And we really appreciate you taking your time, especially with it being so late in Iceland right now.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure Ryan's mentioned, I've been reading like all your most recent articles to put them into MLA. And yeah, it's no problem. No, it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, we just appreciate you joining us in Zoom, and it really brings the class alive. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, I've been very fond. I have very fond memories from Manitoba from my 2006 visit, and 2016 I think was the second time.
Well, you have to come.
Yeah. So these were most excellent visits, and very nice to see you always.
Jason just wanted to say thank you for speaking to us as well. I see that Andrew has something to offer as well. Go ahead, Andy.
Thanks very much, Ármann. I have a question. You mentioned Sturlunga.
Yeah.
So the contemporary sources, and you gave an example, but in those more contemporary sources, do we see a real decline in the number of trolls?
Yeah, like there are not many troll narratives, but possibly people still believe in trolls. They're not just seen as quite as significant because there's no like heathen dimension. Like they also see elves in Sturlunga. There's one mention of some man called Ari. He saw elves, like elves appeared and Ari saw them. This is very strange. Like the man is mentioned, but they don't impact the narrative in any way. But the elves actually don't really impact many narratives taking place in Iceland at all. Like they seem to mostly do their thing outside of Iceland. So and the types of trolls that are most common in the sagas are actual human beings. Like a witch is an actual human being that has just like adopted the profession of witch. And a zombie is a former human being that somebody has decided to reanimate. But this is not happening in the Sturlung age because like witchcraft is illegal. But the legal codes that are actually from the 13th century, they mention trolls in both senses. Like it's both forbidden to wake up a troll, clearly a ghost, and then you can't have a troll as a guest for dinner. And this second troll is obviously a witch of some kind, or possibly a heretic. I think one of my friends thinks the troll in this sentence is a heretic, and that would be a fair use of the word, according to my sources. So no trolls for dinner. That's but like there wouldn't be such laws if people didn't believe in trolls. Obviously not.
Is this specifically from Yon's book
Do you have
from the 13th century?
I think these best examples are actually from Norwegian law.
Okay, yeah, like Gulathings and
But from around 1270, like the similar. But this is more or less the same. This is more or less the same area then, and they had to more or less. Although Iceland didn't have quite as harsh laws in every way as the Norwegians for some reason.
Fair enough. It'd be interesting. I've never seen sort of a comparative done between all of the law books. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, people are working on it now. Laura Dottir has done a bit. Like she was particularly interested in banishment, and there are other people, Mauri Jónsson also, who worked a bit on this. And so there are some slight differences, and maybe they're important. But this is not really my field. But I find it fascinating that the trolls are in the law codes. Like it just shows that they are a part of reality. And also this interesting thing that I mentioned before, that there are two types of trolls, and one is just a regular walking, living human.
What do you take? I mean, you mentioned how Eöl Skallagrímsson and Þorgrímur himself were sort of trolls.
Yes.
Isn't it because they're descendants of the Hrafnismenn? Is that?
Yes.
Am I recollecting that properly?
Well, they definitely have shape-shifting blood, and they are shapeshifters themselves. But the saga is really vague about what shape-shifting entails. And of course, this is the nice thing about narrative. Like in a film, you have to show everything. But in a narrative, you can just tell people that somebody is shape-shifting and they can imagine whatever they want. And I think Eöl Saga actually trades on that. Like I think Saga means to address two types of audiences. One who believes that shapeshifting is a metaphor, and the other who believes that they're actually changing into werewolves. And this is something that can be done with this type of narrative, because the word is just used so carefully. This is one of the worst things about people stopping reading books, is that it's never the same to read a book and to see something, because like your imagination is doing so much when you read a book.
Right. So we've got you for a few more minutes. Does anybody else have anything to offer before I start plaguing Ármann with more questions? Brynja, yeah, Perry.
Hi, I just wanted to maybe just a kind of maybe sort of comment. I just found it interesting that you mentioned the movements, because then everyone, of course, or almost everyone in the movement world is a troll in a way, and maybe there's very few human beings, and so maybe it goes kind of opposite of the sagas where the foreigners are the trolls, but with the movements it's the humans who are actually the foreigners. And of course, from a reader's perspective, then you're looking through this perspective of the movement trolls as well. I think that's kind of an interesting connection.
This is possibly the reason is that in Iceland they're translated into elves. So the movement troll is not a troll in Icelandic. He is a movement elf. And
right.
Yeah, and this is something clearly the like troll category does not fit such creatures anymore in the and this is as you know, of course, there is a size difference between Scandinavian trolls of the 20th century and Icelandic trolls of the 20th century. Like the Icelandic trolls are generally seen as larger, whereas the Danish trolls they are often small. So this is a case of I think what originally is the same concept, just diverting into two directions.
All right, Perry, do you have anything to add to that in your experience with the movement world?
Yeah, he was
Yeah, I think you mentioned as well. They're called Alvar in Icelandic, and if I remember correctly, in Swedish they're just called the Moomin troll. So there's this semantic kind of difference already with how the Swedish speaking world perceives the trolls, and then how Icelandic translations would depict them.
Yeah, the word just cannot be used in Iceland because it would suggest completely different.
But you'll show the visitors a different troll, the cute trolls.
Yes.
Which I imagine the movement sort of goes with the cute troll.
They will end up belonging in the category, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's cutified enough. I kind of miss the vicious trolls of the 19th century that were always very dangerous and were always trying to attack humans. And they were very predatory in every way. So this is kind of a dimension that's been taken out now.
Okay, well, it is getting late where you are now. It is 9:30 now, so I would consider letting you go now.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. It was wonderful talking to you again.
Yes, nice. Thank you.
Thanks.